What happens when an entire family disappears overnight, leaving behind no signs of struggle, no witnesses? Just a note on the table: in 1992, an Amish family of 7 vanished from their quiet Pennsylvania farm. For 10 years, the community prayed, wondered, and waited, but it wasn't until a single photograph was re-examined that a chilling truth began to surface. Before we begin, make sure to like this video and subscribe to our channel. You won't want to miss how this haunting mystery unfolds, because what the Amish community found after a decade of silence was more disturbing than anyone imagined. The disappearance. It was a peaceful spring morning in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. The Lapp family farm stood still and serene like any other Amish homestead. But when neighbors came by Monday morning, something was wrong. There were no footsteps in the yard, no children chasing chickens, no smoke rising from the chimney, just a handwritten note on the kitchen table: gone for the weekend, visiting family for church matters, will return Monday. Don't worry about the animals. Arrange for neighbor boys to help Aaron. That was all. But Aaron, his wife Miriam, and their 5 children, Eli, Michael, Sarah, Ruth, and little Daisy, never returned the first search. Concerned neighbors quickly alerted Aaron's brother Levi, who lived just a few miles away. Levi found the house undisturbed. Beds were made, dishes clean, no signs of a rushed departure. The family's horses and buggies were gone, yes, but so was every trace of where they went. Levi informed the local bishop, who then contacted police. A rare move in Amish tradition. Authorities questioned neighbors and family members. They searched the surrounding farms and nearby highways, but there were no leads, no accidents reported, no unusual sightings. After a few days, investigators quietly stepped back. The Amish community, reluctant to involve English authorities too deeply, did not push the case. Was quietly marked as a voluntary disappearance. It went cold. The remembrance. Fast forward 10 years later to 2002, Levi Lapp had since lost his wife and spent most of his time alone running his furniture shop and tending to property. But every year on the same spring morning, he opened his home to host a remembrance service of family that never returned. On the 10th anniversary, something felt different. The gathering was more intimate, fewer people, older faces. Levi's mother, Esther, was there, so were cousins Samuel and Rebecca, and a few other elders. In the center of Levi's living room sat a table laden not with food, but with mementos, hand-sewn bonnets, homemade toys, family photos. And at the very center, the original note, the same words, the same mystery. No answers, a clue in the background. Then came a moment that would change everything. Daniel, a distant cousin, picked up one of the photographs, a police copy of a family portrait taken a week before the disappearance. It showed Aaron and Miriam with their children smiling in front of their white farmhouse, but Daniel wasn't looking at their faces. He was looking at the laundry line behind them. Why would Miriam do wash in the morning? They were leaving for the weekend. He asked, puzzled. She would never leave clean clothes out for 3 days. That's not how Amish women do things. The room went silent. Everyone leaned in to examine the picture. And then Mary, Miriam's best friend, pointed at something strange, a piece of clothing on the line, something that did not belong, a fluorescent green-yellow vest with the word police faintly visible across the back. The forgotten visitor. Levi's mind raced. A memory surfaced. Officer Breener. He said aloud, Paul Breener. He used to visit often back, then helped us with barn raisings, even fixed fences. A good man. He was close with Aaron. No one could recall seeing him since shortly after the disappearance. Why would his vest be in Miriam's laundry? Asked Rebecca. No one had an answer. And suddenly the idea that Aaron and his family had simply left voluntarily seemed less likely. The group agreed Levi should find the vest. If it was still there, returning to the house, Levi retrieved the keys, one for Aaron's house, one for the old farmhouse on a separate property. He hadn't set foot there in months. The house looked untouched, a ghost of the past. Dust hung in the air like memory. Upstairs in the bedroom, he found at a cedar chest Ripka, his late wife, had used to store Aaron and Miriam's belongings, and right on top, folded neatly and carefully, the police vest, bright, clean, intact. The name stitched in white thread, P. Breener, Part 2, the vest of visit, and the lie, A. vest, and a name. Levi held the fluorescent vest in his hands, the sunlight from Aaron's old bedroom window illuminating the words stitched across the chest, P. Breener. The name hit him like a forgotten song, Paul Breener. He had been more than just a local officer. He was a familiar face at church events, a helper, barn raisings, and someone Aaron had once called a friend. Why had Levi never noticed his absence until now? Why had Brenna never asked about his missing vest? Levi placed a vest in the passenger seat of his car. He didn't call. He didn't write. He drove straight to the New Holland police station. The first visit to the station was quiet, too quiet for what Levi had imagined. He approached the front desk and asked for Officer Breener. The young officer behind the desk, a man named Jenkins, gave a polite shrug. He's in the field, hasn't checked in since noon due. You know where he might be hard to say I can take a message. No, thank you, Levi said, keeping the vest tucked under his arm. I'll return later. This is something I need to say in person is strange. Encounter. Levi drove through the countryside, vest still on the seat beside him. As he passed a neighboring property, the Yoda farm, he noticed something odd. Two men in dark uniforms were arguing with Jakob Yoda near the barn. They weren't police. Their uniforms had no patches, no names, no visible ID. Levi stopped and got out. The exchange was tense. We told you. Before one of the strangers was saying, your land is valuable. It's time to sell. This land has been in my family for generations, Jakob replied firmly. We will not sell you. Amish people think you can just sit on valuable land forever. The other man snapped. That's enough, Levi said loudly, stepping closer. He asked you to leave. You should listen. One of the men tossed a card on the ground before walking off. Land Development Associates. It read no name, just a phone. Number. Jakob looked shaken. They've been coming every day, always the same pressure. Levi asked, do you know what they want with your land? Progress, Jakob replied bitterly, but they never say what kind. Then he paused. You know, something similar happened about 10 years ago. Men like that came around here then, too. Right before he didn't need to finish the sentence, Levi knew exactly what he meant. Brenner returns on his way to check the old farmhouse. Levi spotted a patrol car parked along the road, sunglasses, tired eyes, familiar face. Officer Breener. Levi pulled over, heart pounding, and approached the window. Levy lapped. Breener said with a warm smile, how are you holding up? Levi didn't answer the pleasantries. I have something of yours. He went to his car and returned with a vest. Breener's expression flickered just for a second before settling into puzzled familiarity. Yes, I forgot all about that. Miriam insisted on washing it for me. I spilled soup. I think that was the morning they left. You never mentioned being there that day. Levi said, his voice low. Brenner nodded. It didn't seem relevant at the time. He was smooth, too smooth. Then he added, we were discussing safety concerns. Private developers wanted to build something nearby. Aaron was worried I was just checking, and Levi thought about Jakob, about the two men in dark uniforms, about the progress that had threatened their community once before something clicked, and Brenna saw a sudden exit. Just then a black truck appeared in the distance, the same one from Jakob's property. Brenna stiffened. I have a meeting. He said, quickly, let's talk soon. Levi really. Without waiting, he pulled out and followed the black truck. Levi watched until they vanished down the road. He now had two questions burning in his mind. Who were these so-called developers, and why was a trusted officer chasing them like a shadow? Part 3, Foundations and Shadows. A visit to the farmhouse. After Breener's strange departure, Levi drove out to Aaron's second property, a 40-acre farmhouse nestled deep in the countryside. It had sat untouched for years. The wooden gate creaked. As Levi entered, the porch was weather-worn, and the for rail sign leaned tiredly against a post inside. Dust floated through the stale air. But something else was in the air, too, the sense that someone had recently been here. He swept up mouse droppings in the corners and started cleaning. It felt almost like preparing a home for company. He didn't know why, but something told him to stay. That's when a sedan pulled into the driveway of the buyer. A well-dressed man stepped out, confident, polished. He offered a handshake. I noticed a for sale sign. Is the property still available? Levi nodded. It is. The man walked through the house like someone casing a scene. He barely looked at the structure. His eyes kept scanning the windows, the view, the tree lines. Finally, he made an offer. It was half of Levi's asking price. That's below land value. Levi replied, but you're surrounded by Amish farms, not ideal for development. They haggled eventually. The man agreed to meet in the middle. Then he unrolled a map. This is what we're planning. Levi leaned in. Property was outlined in red, filled with commercial symbols, but one marking stood out up on the mountain to the north, circled and marked with unfamiliar symbols. What's this? Levi asked, pointing. The man quickly folded that part under not relevant to this property. He was lying in the office. The man handed Levi a business card and urged him to follow him to his office just down the road. Levi hesitated, but he needed answers. He agreed. The building was jarring glass and steel, a corporate structure planted like a machine in the soil of Amish country. Inside, everything was sharp, sterile, and impersonal. A woman in a dark uniform like the men from Jakob's farm asked for his ID and signatures. That's when Levi noticed a black truck from earlier pulling into the lot. Behind it, Officer Brenna's patrol car trailing discreetly. But neither vehicle stopped. They turned and drove up the mountain road behind the office. Ma'am, Levi asked, what's up that road? The woman didn't look up. You'll have to ask Mr. Davidson. Davidson, the buyer of the model. While waiting, Levi drifted toward a display, a 3D model of a future development. It looked like a small city housing development, strip malls, tourist centers. He recognized his own home on the map, Jakob Yoda's land, Aaron's property, all scheduled for demolition. But one building sat at top of the mountain, a white structure labeled Amish Heritage Memorial. A chill ran down Levi's spine. Memorial not. Museum not center memory, as if the Amish were already gone flight. The receptionist called him back to sign final forms, but Levi backed away. I just remembered something urgent. He said, "Please tell Mr. Davidson I'll need to rescue you." She pressed, "He's waiting. I'll return later." As Levi turned to leave, she picked up the phone, speaking urgently to someone. He didn't wait. He ran the mountain road. Levi followed the black truck's dust trail up the winding mountain path. The road was rough, clearly not meant for tourist potholes, jolted his tires, trees, closing like sentries for nearly an hour. He climbed, no signs, no traffic, just wilderness. Finally, the trees parted, and there it was, a construction site, machinery, scaffolding, workers, and at the center, a building that resembled an Amish meeting house, but far too large, far too ornate. It was not real Amish design. It was a theme park version of their life. Undercover Levi spotted a hard hat and vest hanging on a fence. He slipped them on and stepped through an opening. The site buzzed with activity. At the far edge, he saw them, Breener and the two men from Jacob's farm. He moved closer, keeping behind piles of lumber. He heard laughter. One of the men gestured to half-built. "Foundation, this place will be perfect. Tourists love." A sympathetic narrative the simple Amish couldn't keep up. Very touching. Another added, "We waited 10 years. What's a little longer?" Then Brenna spoke. "I've got trust access to the department. Leave the Amish stuff to me. They won't ask questions." Good one. Men said, "Soon this whole valley will be cleared." Then he added, "We buried them here." Levi froze. "Right here under the foundation." They pointed to a patch of fresh concrete. A worker was instructed to dig the backhoe, dug down only a few feet. Before striking something, one of the men reached in and pulled out a human bone. Part 4. What lies beneath the bone in the dirt? Levi couldn't breathe from behind a stack of lumber. He watched as the man handed Officer Brenna a bone, clearly human, weathered and long. The officer examined it and dropped it back into the dirt like trash. The backhoe operator looked sick. "You see," one of the developers said, "we store them here, the whole family, plus a few others who got too curious." Levi's mind raced. Aaron, Miriam, the children dead, not vanished, not run away, buried beneath a fake Amish memorial, a lie designed to sell tickets, and erase lives, a threat to the living. One man laughed, "Once we clear the rest of them out, this valley is ours. The remaining families will either sell or get scared off, and if not, he let the sentence hang in the air." Brenna nodded slowly. "I'll manage it. I always do." A chill ran through Levi's entire body. This wasn't over. It was starting again. A dangerous exit. Levi backed away, heart pounding. His boots crunched lightly over gravel. As he crept toward the fence, every sound felt deafening, every breath too loud. At the edge, he shed the hard hat and vest, leaving them exactly where he found them. Then he ran down the hill through the brush to his car. The 911 call, his hands trembled as he pulled out his phone. He had 2 bars, just enough. 911, what's your emergency? My name is Levi Lapp. He said, I need to report a murder, multiple murders. I've seen human remains. And I have reason to believe a police officer is involved. The dispatcher paused. Sir, are you safe right now? Yes, I'm pulled over partway down the mountain road, just outside New Holland. We're dispatching units. Now, please stay on the line. I saw them digging bones. Levi interrupted. My brother's family. They disappeared 10 years ago. They were murdered and buried. We're sending both local and state authorities. Please stay on the line. But Levi was already driving back. Up the mountain, justice rolls in. Within 15 minutes, sirens filled the mountain. 6 police cruisers tore up the road lights, flashing. Levi followed behind them. As they approached the construction site, the scene exploded into motion. Uniformed officers swept into the area. Brainer stepped out of the building, eyes narrowing as he saw the cruisers. When the developers tried to walk away, Levi parked his car directly in their path. Where are you going? He said, stepping out. Brenna approached, trying to keep calm. Levi, what is this? You helped bury them, Levi said, pointing. You helped kill them. Brenna's mask cracked. But it was too late. The lead sergeant stepped forward. Officer Breener, we're placing you on administrative leave, pending investigation. Please surrender your weapon and step aside. This is a misunderstanding. Then you won't mind us checking. The sergeant said, digging up the truth. Officers descended into the excavation pit. Within seconds, one of them called out, Sir, we got human remains, bones, torn fabric, children's clothing. The site became a crime scene. Brina tried to run. A warning shot rang out. Freeze. He stopped. The 2 developers raised their hands in surrender. One muttered, You're making a mistake. We can fix this. You already did. Levi said, the office raid. Levy told officers about the office building at the base of the mountain. Davidson is down there, the man trying to buy my family's farm. He's part of this. More patrol cars were dispatched at the office. Davidson was handcuffed as receptionist, was questioned, hard drives, maps, documents, all seized. Everything was coming undone. And Levi, he stood in the middle of it all, overwhelmed, but clearly the secret that had haunted him for 10 years had. Finally risen. Part 5, A Voice for the Dead, the Police. Station Levi stood outside the New Holland Police Department as more patrol cars arrived. Officers escorted Brenna and the 2 developers inside. The last to be arrested, Davidson, glared at Levi as he was led past his pristine business suit, a sharp contrast to the handcuffs biting into his wrists. Inside, the station buzzed with urgency. Reporters were gathering. Phone lines rang off the hook, but Levi had one task: to give his full statement. He was led into a quiet room by a state police detective, a composed woman named Detective Sarah Chin. The statement: "I know this has been overwhelming," she said gently, "but I need to hear everything from the beginning." Levy took a breath and began. He told her about the vest and the photograph, the laundry line, the realization that something had never added up: the reappearance of the police, Vesta's visit to Brenna, the developers, the office building, the black truck, and finally the construction site on the mountain. What he heard, what he saw, and what they dug up. Detective Chin listened silently, occasionally nodding, writing notes. When Levi finished, she looked up. "We found something at Davidson's office," she said. "A journal, detailed records of land acquisitions, names of families, notes about intimidation strategies." She paused. "And references to your brother's family, the betrayal. They didn't just want land." Detective Chin said they wanted the whole valley, the Amish community. Was in a way they wanted to erase us. Levi said, voice tight. She nodded. "Davidson's journal says Brenna used his position as community liaison to gain trust. He identified which families had large tracts, which ones were isolated, vulnerable. He ate at our tables." Levi whispered. He had seen Brenna rocking a baby at church, laughing during harvest season, smiling at children. It was all performance. And Aaron, Levi asked, "Why am your brother own more acreage than anyone, and he refused to sell?" Detective Chin looked grave. "They brought him to the mountain, tried to make a deal one last time. When he refused, they panicked. Brenna was afraid he'd go to the bishop or the press. So they silenced him, all of them," Levi said. "Even the children." Chin nodded slowly. "I'm sorry." A family found later that day. Levi's mother, Esther, arrived at the station. Her eyes were red, but resolute. She knew Levi didn't need to say a word. Still, when he met her in the hallway, she whispered, "Is it true?" He nodded. "We found them." Esther's knees buckled. Levi caught her. "They're just bones now, Mom." He said, "But they're coming home." The forensics room, a forensic analyst named Dr. Martinez guided them into a sterile room. She was general professional. "What we recovered are bones from 7 individuals, 2 adults, 5 children, ages and sizes matched the Lapp family exactly." Esther wept silently as she looked at the evidence: tiny shoes, torn fabrica. Button Miriam had sewn herself. Levi held a picture from the remembrance, gathering the whole family, smiling on their porch. He compared it to the pieces laid out in bags. He said, "All of them." Esther whispered prayer in Pennsylvania, Dutch, "No more questions." In the days that followed, the remains were positively identified by DNA. The Lapp family had not run away. They had been murdered, buried like debris beneath a building meant to celebrate the culture they had tried to destroy. Officer Brina was charged with multiple counts of murder, conspiracy, and corruption. Davidson and the developers were charged with racketeering, manslaughter, and fraud. The town was rocked, but the Amish, they stayed quiet. They grieved in silence and prepared for burial, a homecoming. A week later, 7 plain wooden caskets were lowered into ground in the Amish cemetery. No television crews, no speeches, just hymns and closure. Levi stood beside Esther, their hands clasped, their family whole again, not in life, but in rest. Part 6, what the community must face the day after. In the days following the funeral, the town of New Holland was split between disbelief and outrage. News of the arrest spread across Lancaster County like wildfire, but inside the Amish community things were different. There was no shouting, no public protest, just quiet reckoning. Because for them, the tragedy wasn't just about death. It was about trust. It was about doubt. And it was about how close evil had crept without anyone noticing. The bishop's meeting, a special meeting, was called at the meeting house. The benches were full. Men sat on one side, women on the other, heads bowed, waiting. The bishop stood silently at the front. Then Levi rose. He'd been asked to speak. "I thought we were doing the right thing." He began 10 years ago. When my brother's family vanished, we chose faith over fear. We told ourselves not to question, not to chase the English for answers. He looked around the room. We were wrong. Murmurs rippled across the benches, some nods, some frowns. We thought we were keeping peace. Levi continued, voice steady. "But peace without truth isn't peace at all. It's silence. And sometimes silence kills." No one interrupted. Not. because they agreed, but because they were listening. And in the Amish world, listening was sacred. A community in conflict. After the meeting, clusters formed in the gravel courtyard. Some elders said Levi's words were too harsh. Others whispered they had suspected foul play long ago. But no one defended Brenna. The realization hit everyone at once. They had welcomed a wolf in plain clothing. Brina had exploited their trust, their reluctance to involve English authorities, their belief in separation from the outside world. He hadn't just betrayed Aaron, he had betrayed an entire way of life. Esther's letter. A few days later, Esther wrote a letter with help from Levi. She sent to the Lancaster newspaper. It wasn't long, just a single page, but it was powerful. We do not seek vengeance, that is not our way, but we seek truth, and truth was buried like our children beneath the weight of progress. We will not remain silent. Again, the letter was reprinted in multiple papers, and suddenly the Amish had a voice. Without ever speaking into a microphone, the new threat one morning. Levi returned to the old farmhouse one last time, though the sale had been canceled. He wanted to walk the land, to breathe, to remember, but there tacked onto the fence was another business card, same logo, Land Development Associates, a new name written on the back, a different representative. They were still circling, still pressing, still waiting. They had lost Breener, lost Davidson, but the machine hadn't stopped. It had only paused, a choice to be made back at. Home, Levi sat with Samuel, Rebecca, Jacob, Yoda, and a few others we need to decide. He said, placing the card on the table. Do we fight this with courts, lawyers, media? There was silence. Then Jacob spoke. We are not a people courtrooms, he said, but perhaps we could be a people protection. We protect our farms, our children, our future. Samuel nodded. And maybe we don't have to choose English or Amish. Maybe we choose both, use their tools, but keep our spirit. Levi smiled faintly. Then let's start now. Part 7, The Quiet Resistance, a new strategy. Levy sat at his workbench, the center with shavings in the air, but his mind wasn't on the cabinet. He was building. On the table before him were 4 business cards, all from Land Development Associates, different names, different numbers, but all the same game. They weren't finished even. After arrests, even after exposing Breener and Davidson, the company, or whatever shadow group stood behind it, was still trying to buy out the valley. But now the community was ready. They weren't going to fight with fists. They were going to fight with persistence, presence, and unity. The town hall meeting. It was rare for the Amish to attend a meeting with town officials, even rarer for them to speak, but Levi and a group of respected elders showed up at the next New Holland town hall. They wore their Sunday best, and they came prepared. We aren't asking you to change your ways, Levi said, standing in front of a crowd of council members, press, and non-Amish residents. We're asking you to protect ours. They presented letters of community support, testimonies, land deeds dating back generations. They weren't just preserving farms. They were protecting a culture. One official said, You're not alone. This town was built beside you, not over you. Applause followed. It was a stark media attention. Word spread. Esther's letter had caught attention, and now reporters wanted interviews. The Amish declined, of course. But Levi spoke not for the camera, but through letters, editorials, and written statements. We won't sell, not because the price isn't right, but because this land was never for sale. It was borrowed from God. For as long as we are faithful stewards, a news station ran a story, The Quiet Resistance in Amish Country, donations poured in legal. Offer support. A group of non-Mish neighbors created a watchdog coalition, vowing to protect the region from corporate overreach. Even Mennonite groups offered help. For the first time, the Amish weren't isolated. They were joined. Breener's trial. In early spring, the trial began. Breener stood before the court, no longer an officer, just a man in a suit. The evidence was damning. The bones, the journal witnessed testimony from workers who had overheard too much. Levi was called to testify. He didn't want to, but he looked Breener in the eye and said, You used our trust like a tool. You smiled in our homes. You held our children. Then you helped bury them. I don't want your apology. I want no other family to suffer like mine. Breener didn't look up the verdict. Guilty. On all counts, he was sentenced to life without parole. Healing begins. A cemetery in New Holland held a new row now. 7 modest headstones. Aaron, Miriam, Eli, Michael, Sarah, Ruth, Daisy, Levi visited weekly. Sometimes he sat in silence. Other times he whispered updates on the barn, raising on Esther's health, on how the community had finally opened its eyes. There were still buyers knocking, still pressure, but now the valley answered with one voice. No, a future preserved later. That Year Preservation Trust was founded, a legal shield for Amish land structured to protect it permanently from external development. Without community consent, Levi signed the first deed over to the trust. So did Jacob. So did Samuel. One by one, farms were entered into the registry not as sales, but as vows that this land would never again be stolen, not by bullets, not by bribes, and not by silence. Part 8, the legacy. They couldn't bury 1 year. Later the wind carried the scent of corn and new hay across the valley. It had been a year since the truth was unearthed, a year since Levi Lapp stood on a mountainside and heard in the most awful way what had happened to his brother's family, and yet in the quiet dawn light of the farm there was peace, not the kind that comes from forgetting, but the kind that comes from knowing the memorial on the edge of the cemetery, a small, simple marker, stood apart from the rest. It read, "In memory of the Lapp family. They didn't disappear, they were taken. And now, their home, it wasn't for tourists. There were no plaques, no brochures, just a place where truth was planted and allowed to grow in the hearts of those who remembered Esther's garden. Levi's mother, now in her late 70s, had taken to gardening again. Her small patch behind her house bloomed with herbs, tomatoes, and flowers. Sometimes neighbors stopped by to check on her. Sometimes she sat in silence, humming hymns. I speak to Miriam in the garden, she told Levi once, not with words, with gratitude. Gratitude, yes, she said, for being found, for being named, for the Amish naming grief was an act of faith. The community changes. The Preservation Trust continued to grow. More families joined. Even young couples who hadn't known Aaron personally vowed to protect their land. The valley was no longer just a collection of farms. It was a united front. The Land Development Associates never came back. Davidson's company dissolved in disgrace. Lawsuits followed. Money meant for developments was seized. Permits were revoked, and the mountain, it was off limits, declared a protected site. After forensic recovery, what was meant to be a theme park of Amish memory had become a sacred place of truth. Levi's decision. One afternoon, a news station reached out again. They wanted Levi to speak publicly on television and to share the hero story. He refused. Instead, he wrote a single paragraph of their website. I didn't stop them. I didn't say my brother. I just listened, looked, and refused to forget. The truth isn't always loud. Sometimes it's patient, waiting beneath the floorboards in a folded vest in a laundry line. They printed it in full. A quiet morning, one spring morning, Levi walked to the cemetery with his nephew Michael Jr., named after one of the lost children. The boy was 7. He knelt beside his namesake's grave and whispered, "My dad says you were kind." Levy looked down at him. "You would have liked him," he said softly. They walked back in silence. Because sometimes silence was no longer something to be feared. It was something earned final thoughts. This story began with a note on a kitchen table gone for the weekend, but it ended with a community that refused to be erased, that refused to let their people be turned into a product, that refused to let progress mean forgetting. They fought back with unity, with faith, and with memory, and they won not justice, but a future. If this story resonated with you, if you believe truth matters, even when it takes 10 years to emerge like this video, and subscribe to our channel, we'll keep sharing the stories that others bury, because every once in a while bones speak.